My mom tried to poison my coffee for insurance money. When I walked through the front door after my deployment ended, I expected hugs, maybe some tears. Instead, my mom looked at me like I just told her the lottery ticket she was holding was fake. She actually stumbled backward and grabbed the door frame to steady herself. My dad was holding my sister Cecilia's hand, and I watched her face drain of color in real time. It was the kind of white you see in movies, except this was my actual family staring at me like I was a ghost they didn't want to see. I set my military hat on the kitchen counter and tried to laugh it off. Yeah, I made it. Been cleared to come home for months now. The silence that followed felt thick enough to choke on. I looked at each of them individually, really looked, and that's when I caught it. Just for a second, maybe two, I saw disappointment flash across all three faces. Not relief, not joy, disappointment. Growing up, I'd always been the family screw-up in their eyes. The one who couldn't get into the right college, couldn't land the impressive job, couldn't make them proud at family gatherings. I'd hoped that serving my country might change that. Stupid, I know. But I genuinely believed that coming home after deployment would finally earn me some respect. Instead, they looked at me like I'd ruined their plans by surviving. My dad cleared his throat and said something that made my blood run cold. Son, have you thought about extending your deployment? I just stared at him. All three of them were looking at me with this weird anticipation, like they were holding their breath waiting for my answer. That's when I made a decision that probably makes me a terrible person, but I needed to know the truth. I can't extend, I said slowly. I was exposed to the burn pits over there. Gave me a rare form of cancer. Doctors say I've got maybe 8 months left. The lie came out smoother than I expected. I watched their faces like a hawk, looking for any sign of genuine concern or sadness. Instead, for just a split second, I caught identical smirks on all three faces. My mom's hand flew to her mouth, but not before I saw it. That little upturn at the corner of her lips. "Oh, honey, that's terrible," my sister said, burying her face in her hands. But her shoulders weren't shaking. She wasn't actually crying. My mom reached over and rubbed my arm. "Well, at least the military provides good death benefits, right? They take care of families." I felt sick. "I think it's around 400,000 for grieving families," I said, testing them. The energy in the room shifted immediately. My dad's posture relaxed. Cecilia looked up from her fake crying with suddenly clear eyes. I told them I was exhausted from traveling and needed to crash on the couch for a bit. Nobody argued. Nobody offered me my old room. They just nodded and went into the kitchen. I lay on that couch pretending to sleep, and that's when I heard everything that confirmed my worst suspicions. My mom's voice carried from the kitchen, talking to my sister and her boyfriend Pender about the insurance payout. $400,000 when I died. Pender could finally start his business. Cecilia's wedding would be fully funded. They were dividing up my death benefits like they were planning a vacation. I'd heard stories like this in the military. Guys whose families saw them as paychecks instead of people. I never thought it would happen to me, but here I was lying on a couch listening to my own family celebrate my impending death. The thing is, I wasn't actually sick. I was healthier than I'd been in years. I'd just gotten a $300,000 reenlistment bonus that they knew nothing about. And I'd been promoted twice. Over the next few days, I committed to the performance of my life. I started stumbling into walls when they were watching. I'd cough into tissues and make sure they saw red food coloring that looked like blood. When Pender mentioned wanting a new truck, I made sure to wheeze and say I wished I could help. That's when my dad pulled out some paperwork. "Just family stuff," he said, sliding documents across the table. "Since you're not feeling well, this will help us take care of things for you." My hands shook as I picked up the pen, but I made it look like weakness from my fake illness instead of the rage I actually felt. The documents were for a $100,000 loan against my life insurance policy. I signed them, knowing full well that what they were doing was a federal crime. "Whatever helps the family, Dad," I said quietly. The real chaos started when Pender quit his job. He walked in one afternoon carrying a box of his desk belongings, announcing to Cecilia that he didn't need to work anymore since they'd be rich in 5 months. I was supposed to be at a fake doctor's appointment, but I come home early and heard the whole thing from my room. He even bragged about faking half his degree and certifications, laughing about how his boss never bothered to check. At dinner a few nights later, I decided to test him. The doctor said something weird today. I mentioned casually pushing food around my plate. My white blood cell count is actually improving. He thinks maybe the cancer isn't as aggressive as we thought. Cecilia's fork clattered onto her plate. She recovered quickly, forcing a smile. I mean, doctors are wrong all the time. Let's not get our hopes up. Pinder jumped in immediately, agreeing that false hope was cruel and we should prepare for the worst. I nodded slowly, but in my head, I was already planning my next move. Every day they thought I was at treatment, I was actually living my real life. I'd taken my bonus money and bought a Mercedes AMG that I kept in a storage unit across town. I'd rented a downtown penthouse and furnished it completely. Nobody in my family knew about any of it. I was building an escape plan while documenting every single thing they did. The funeral planning was probably the most disturbing part. My mom pulled out an actual binder one evening. She'd picked out my casket, she explained, showing me the cheapest option available. Cecilia was going to give my eulogy. The funeral home would be paid directly from the life insurance, so they wouldn't have to front any money themselves. My dad had already cashed out his entire 401k, losing $80,000 to penalties because he was so certain I'd be dead soon and they'd recover the money from my insurance. Cecilia had dropped out of college in her final semester, forfeiting her degree and $60,000 in tuition. My mom had broken her apartment lease and told the landlord to sue her because she'd be rich soon anyway. They were burning through their lives, so confident in my death that they'd stopped caring about consequences. Then I heard something that made everything darker. Late one night, I heard my dad on a conference call with someone whose accent I didn't recognize. There was casino noise in the background. My dad was promising this person money, saying the insurance would pay out in 2 months maximum. The voice on the other end asked what happens if they don't pay, and there was an unmistakable threat in the question. My dad had borrowed from loan sharks, using my life as collateral. The next morning, my mom handed me a coffee with shaking hands. Something was wrong with it immediately. The taste was off, bitter in a way that had nothing to do with how it was brewed. I pretended to drink it while she watched, then poured it down the sink the second she left. At the bottom of the cup was a grainy residue that definitely wasn't coffee grounds. I photographed it and saved a sample in a sealed bag. My mom had tried to poison me. I called my buddy Tristan, the only person from my unit I still trusted completely. I told him everything in a rush, barely pausing to breathe. He listened to the whole story without interrupting once. When I finished, there was a long silence before he said, "Document everything. Every conversation, every text, every piece of paper they make you sign. And for God's sake, don't do anything that makes you as bad as they are." I spent the next few hours at a library 2 towns over, setting up secure cloud storage under an email they didn't know about. I uploaded every recording I'd made. Audio from the kitchen where they divided up my death benefits. Video of Pinder bragging about his fake credentials. Screenshots of Cecilia's texts about wedding venues. I created folders for each family member, adding timestamps and context notes for everything. The most disturbing discovery came when I walked past the family computer and saw Cecilia had left herself logged in. I read through her text conversation with Pinder from 2 days earlier. She was asking about ways to shorten the wait, whether his cousin who worked as a nurse could get access to something stronger than sleeping pills. Pinder asked what she meant by stronger. Cecilia wrote back that she meant something that would look natural, like a heart attack or a stroke. My own sister was actively plotting to murder me. I took screenshots with shaking hands and sent them immediately to Detective Morris, a cop I contacted earlier that week. He told me I needed to wear a wire and document everything in real time if we wanted the case to stick. I scheduled a hospice consultation for Sunday afternoon, telling my family that the doctors wanted to discuss end-of-life care options. They practically celebrated. What they didn't know was that I'd also contacted the insurance company's fraud department anonymously, tipping them off to audit my dad's paperwork. And I'd arranged for Detective Morris and his team to be watching everything. Saturday morning, a fake insurance payout check arrived by courier. I had a hidden camera aimed at the front door and mail table. I watched from my room as Pinder opened the envelope, his eyes going wide when he saw the check amount. He grabbed a pen and practiced my signature over and over on scratch paper. Then he carefully forged my name on the endorsement line. The whole thing was captured in perfect high-definition video. Sunday morning arrived, and I could barely breathe. I drove to a notary office and had them witness proper legal documents revoking all the power of attorney paperwork my dad had tricked me into signing. Then I went back to the house and waited. At noon, Detective Morris arrived and fitted me with a wire. A small microphone taped to my chest, connected to a transmitter on my belt. He went over the safety protocols. If I said the word hospital, they'd come in immediately. He tested the equipment, put his hand on my shoulder, and told me I was doing the right thing. Then he left through the back door to join his team positioned outside. At exactly 2 in the afternoon, the hospice social worker named Marguerite arrived. She was a kind-looking woman in her 50s with a leather folder full of intake forms. I introduced her to my family, and she started asking questions about my diagnosis and care needs. My family performed beautifully, talking over each other about how devoted they were to helping me through this difficult time. At 2:15, the doorbell rang again. I answered it to find a woman in a business suit holding a large folder. She introduced herself as Evelyn from the insurance company, here to review some paperwork irregularities with my dad. I watched the color drain from his face as I invited her inside. The energy in the room shifted completely. Marguerite looked confused but maintained her professional expression. Evelyn sat down and opened her audit folder, pulling out a stack of documents. She asked my dad to explain how he'd access my insurance portal. He tried to stay calm, but sweat was already forming on his forehead. That's when Pinder, who'd been drinking since morning, started talking. He laughed and said how smart they'd all been about this. He listed everything they'd bought with the borrowed money. He talked about quitting his job and how his boss was too stupid to check his fake credentials. He said they'd been planning this for months, just waiting for me to die so they could finally be rich. He described their plans for after I was gone, like I wasn't sitting right there listening to every word. My mom tried to shut him up, but he kept going. Cecilia was crying real tears now because she knew something was very wrong. Marguerite asked my mom about medication management, her voice careful and cold. My mom got defensive, saying she'd just been putting something in my coffee to help me sleep through the pain. Just some sleeping pills, nothing dangerous, she said. The front door opened, and Detective Morris walked in with 3 uniformed officers behind them. They spread out into the room with calm authority. Detective Morris identified himself and said they were investigating insurance fraud, identity theft, and attempted poisoning. Everyone needed to come to the station for questioning. My mom started screaming that it was a mistake. My dad just sat there staring at nothing. Cecilia looked at me, and I saw the exact moment she understood. Her eyes went wide, and then her expression shifted from shock to anger to pure hatred. She realized I'd never been sick, that I'd set this entire thing up, that the dying son they'd been celebrating was actually perfectly healthy and had just destroyed all of them. At exactly 2:30, a black SUV pulled up outside. 2 men in expensive suits got out and started walking toward the house. The loan sharks my family owed money to had arrived right on schedule. The uniformed officers intercepted them at the end of the driveway. Within minutes, both men were in handcuffs. One of them apparently had an outstanding warrant. Over the next 2 hours, my house transformed into a crime scene. Evidence technicians photographed everything. They bagged the pill bottles from the kitchen counter. They took the coffee cup with the grainy residue, documenting it with chain of custody forms. They found my hidden recording devices and actually complimented me on my thoroughness. The forged insurance documents were collected as evidence. Detective Morris drove me to the police station where I gave my full statement. I explained everything from the moment I came home and saw disappointment on their faces. I admitted to faking the cancer and the symptoms. I described the loan, the funeral planning, the poisoned coffee, all of it. When I finished, Detective Morris told me I needed to get my own lawyer because even though I was clearly the victim, my own deception about being terminally ill could create legal complications. The arrests happened over the next few days. My mom was charged with attempted poisoning and the judge denied bail, calling her a danger. My dad got charged with insurance fraud and identity theft, but made bail. Cecilia and Pinder were brought in for questioning about conspiracy. The text messages about finding ways to speed up my death were shown to Cecilia during her interview. Neither of them was arrested that night, but they were told not to leave town. Restraining orders were issued, keeping all four of them away from me. Walking out of the police station, I felt strange and empty, like I'd been carrying something heavy for so long that without it, I didn't know how to stand properly. My phone became unusable from extended family calling and texting. Some had heard I was a liar who faked cancer to set up my family. Others heard my parents were monsters who tried to kill me for money. The family group chat turned into a war zone. I stopped reading messages after the first day and turned off my phone, checking it once daily only for updates from Detective Morris or my lawyer. The bail hearings were brutal. I had to attend as a witness. My dad made bail with money borrowed from his brother. My mom's hearing was different because the prosecutor brought photos of the drug coffee and played recordings of her talking about helping me rest. The judge denied bail and remanded her to custody pending trial. Watching her led away in handcuffs made me feel sick, even knowing she'd try to kill me. The insurance company froze my entire policy and sent a letter suspending all claims. My new lawyer negotiated with their legal team. They offered me limited immunity for my false statements about being terminally ill in exchange for my testimony against my dad. The deal meant I wouldn't face criminal charges for lying about cancer, but I'd have to pay back the $100,000 loan amount plus penalties and interest. Total payback would be around $120,000, eating up a big chunk of my military bonus, but better than jail. 2 weeks after everything exploded, I got a call from someone with a thick accent. He told me my father still owed money and the debt didn't disappear just because some collection people got arrested. He said I could help the family by paying what was owed. When I refused, he told me to think carefully about my decision. I recorded the call and sent it to Detective Morris, who said these threats were actually helpful evidence, but advised me to be careful. I installed extra locks and security cameras on my penthouse. I slowly moved my life fully into the penthouse, making it feel like an actual home. I hung pictures, bought real furniture, set up my military awards in the living room. The place transformed from a secret hideout into somewhere I could actually live. I found a therapist who specialized in family trauma. In our first session, I tried to explain how I felt and kept coming back to the same thing. I didn't know how to feel about any of this. Relief that I'd exposed them before they could kill me. Guilt that I'd lied and manipulated them. Anger at what they'd done. Grief for the family I thought I had, but apparently never existed. All of it mixed together in ways I couldn't untangle. She told me that was completely normal, that trauma doesn't come in neat packages. We'd work on processing everything piece by piece. Healing wasn't about making the feelings go away, but about learning to live with them without being controlled by them. Tristan visited one weekend, and we sat on my balcony drinking beer and watching the city lights. I told him I kept having dreams where my family actually loved me, and the whole thing was a misunderstanding. He said that was normal, that wanting them to be different people didn't make me weak or stupid. Everybody wants their family to love them. It's hardwired into humans. Just because they didn't doesn't mean something was wrong with me. 3 months later, I'd settled into a new normal. Therapy twice a week. Tristan calling every Sunday. I found a part-time job at a veteran support center doing intake paperwork, something that got me around people who understood deployment without needing explanations. The wire recorder Detective Morris gave me stayed in my desk drawer as a reminder that trust wasn't something you just gave away anymore. It was something you verified first and earned over time. I wasn't happy exactly, not the way people mean when they talk about happiness. But I was safe. And some days that felt like enough. Like maybe safety was the foundation you built everything else on top of, and I was still learning how to lay those first stones without my hands shaking. The legal proceedings dragged on for months. My dad eventually took a plea deal, pleading guilty to insurance fraud and identity theft in exchange for a reduced sentence of 3 years. My mom went to trial and was convicted of attempted poisoning. She got 7 years. Cecilia and Pender both took plea deals for conspiracy charges, getting probation and community service since they hadn't actually poisoned me themselves. I testified at my mom's trial, had to sit in that courtroom and describe finding the residue in my coffee, hearing them plan my funeral, watching them celebrate my impending death. My mom's lawyer tried to paint me as a manipulative liar who'd entrapped my innocent family. The prosecutor played the recordings, all of them planning how to spend my death benefits. My mom talking about helping me rest through the pain. Pinder describing me as a dumb bastard who was about to make them rich. The jury deliberated for 4 hours before coming back with guilty verdicts on all counts. When the judge read the sentence, my mom turned around in her seat and looked directly at me. Her expression wasn't angry or sad. It was just empty, like she was looking at a stranger. Maybe that's what I'd always been to her. I used part of my bonus to pay back the insurance company according to our settlement. Monthly payments of $667 for 5 years. The rest of the money went into investments and savings. I sold the Mercedes because driving it felt wrong somehow, like I was celebrating something that shouldn't be celebrated. I kept the penthouse, though. It was the first place that had ever felt like mine. The threatening calls from the loan sharks stopped after a few months. Detective Morris told me the entire lending operation had been shut down in a federal investigation. The 2 guys who'd shown up at my house that Sunday were part of a larger organized crime ring that operated out of 3 states. My family's debt had been relatively small compared to what other people owed. In a weird way, their greed had helped bring down some genuinely dangerous people. I started dating someone I met at the Veterans Center. Her name was Ashley, and she'd served 2 deployments as a medic. I told her about my family on our 3rd date, the whole story, expecting her to run. Instead, she just nodded and said her own family had disowned her for being gay, so she understood what it meant to grieve people who were still alive. We took things slow, both of us carrying our own damage, trying to figure out how to trust again. On the anniversary of that Sunday, when everything exploded, I drove out to a state park and went hiking alone. I needed to think about everything that had happened and what it meant. I lied to my family, manipulated them, set an elaborate trap that sent them all to prison or probation. Was I the villain in this story? Or was I just someone who'd fought back against people trying to kill me? I thought about my mom's face when she handed me that poison coffee. My dad forging my signature on insurance documents. Cecilia texting about ways to speed up my death. Pinder laughing about me being a dumb bastard. They made their choices long before I made mine. I just refused to be their victim. Sitting on a boulder overlooking a valley, I realized I didn't regret what I'd done. Not the lie, not the recordings, not the trap I'd set. I regretted that it had been necessary. I regretted having a family that valued money more than my life. But I didn't regret protecting myself. And maybe that was enough. I pulled out my phone and called Tristan. Told him I thought I was going to be okay eventually. He said he'd known that all along. I just needed time to figure it out myself. We talked for an hour about nothing important, and when I hung up, I felt lighter somehow. The therapist had told me that healing wasn't linear. Some days would be harder than others. Some days I'd feel angry all over again. Some days I'd feel guilty. And some days I'd feel nothing at all, just numb. All of that was normal and acceptable. The goal wasn't to feel perfect, just to keep moving forward. I hiked back down the mountain as the sun was setting. Got in my car and drove back to my penthouse in the city. Ashley was coming over for dinner, and I'd promised to cook. Nothing fancy, just pasta and garlic bread, but it felt good to have someone to cook for. Someone who knew my story and stuck around anyway. When I unlocked my apartment door, I didn't feel the usual anxiety that came with coming home. The security system beeped its familiar tone. My furniture was exactly where I'd left it. The military awards on my shelf caught the evening light. This was my space, built by my choices, protected by my decisions. Whatever my family had tried to take from me, they'd failed. I wasn't the family disappointment anymore. I wasn't the walking insurance payout. I wasn't the dying son they planned a cheap funeral for. I was just me, figuring out how to live a life that was actually mine. And if that made me the villain in their version of events, I could live with that. At least I was alive to be the villain, which was more than they'd planned for me.
Catch you again soon.